The Carvax training complex on Station Erebus 9 was not despite what the glossy recruitment hollows suggested, a place where warriors were forged through noble discipline and mutual respect. No, it was more accurately described as a pressure cooker where the strong reminded the weak of their cosmic station through the time-honored tradition of beating the absolute hell out of them. The unified sectors had many proud traditions spanning 47 member species, and institutional bullying masked as combat training was definitely in the top 5. Station Erebus 9 orbited a gas giant in the Kelvorian sector, a massive construct of alloys and ambition that housed approximately 12,000 military cadets from across known space. The Carvax complex occupied the station's 7th ring, a sprawling facility where future soldiers learned the arts of war, diplomacy, and, most importantly, which species you could shove around in the showers without getting court-martialed. The pecking order was well established. At the top sat the Vrolthan, 8-foot towers of muscle and reptilian arrogance who evolved on a high-gravity death world where the flowers could kill you. And the actual predators made flowers look like a pleasant alternative. They were built like someone had designed a linebacker, decided that wasn't intimidating enough, added scales and fangs, then said screw it, and doubled everything. Their natural strength was approximately 4 times that of most humanoid species, which they never let anyone forget. Just below them prowled the Kelmorian, 4-armed beings with crystalline exoskeletons that refracted light in unsettling ways. They were shock troops by nature, capable of independent limb coordination that made them spectacular in close combat and absolutely insufferable at arm wrestling. Each of their 4 arms could bench press a small vehicle, and they organized their entire cultural identity around who could break what with their bare hands. Then came a dozen other species of varying combat capability, each finding their niche in the military hierarchy like a very violent game of intergalactic Tetris. The Torellian occupied the bottom rung, bird-like beings with hollow bones and a cultural emphasis on engineering rather than face-punching. They were essential for keeping the fleet's systems running, but were generally considered, in the parlance of military cadets across the galaxy, walking target practice. Humans had joined this magnificent circus exactly 18 months ago. Earth had finally developed faster-than-light travel, stumbled into sector space like someone wandering into an advanced physics lecture, and promptly been told to sit in the back and try to keep up. The general consensus among the established species was that humans were adorably primitive, distressingly fragile, and probably shouldn't be allowed near anything more dangerous than a spatula without supervision. Human bone density? Laughable. Human strength? Cute. Human combat instincts? Please. They came from a garden world with reasonable gravity, predictable weather, and predators that actually ran away sometimes. Earth was basically a vacation planet that had somehow produced a species arrogant enough to think they belonged among real warriors. The Carvax training arena was where these cosmic hierarchies were reinforced daily. It was a circular space, roughly 200 meters across, floored with shock-absorbent plating that could handle a Vrolthan hitting it face first at terminal velocity, which happened more often than the instructors admitted in official reports. Equipment racks lined the walls, holding everything from standard melee trainers to weighted harnesses that simulated different gravity conditions. Observation platforms ringed the upper levels, theoretically for instructors to monitor training, but practically for cadets to watch the entertainment. And entertainment was exactly what was happening on this particular station cycle afternoon. Vec of House Torrent, a Torellian cadet barely into his 3rd molt, had made the critical error of existing in the same training slot as Kragoth and his merry band of sociopaths. Vec was slight even by Torellian standards, his feathers carrying the blue-green iridescence of youth. bones as hollow as his chances of surviving the next 10 minutes. He had committed no actual offense, unless you counted being naturally weaker than species who considered gravity a hobby. Kragoth was the dictionary definition of a Vrolthan bully, if the dictionary was written by someone who really hated everyone. He stood 8.5 feet of scaled muscle, with the kind of face that suggested his mother had been frightened by a particularly aggressive geological formation. His eyes were the color of old rust, and his idea of subtle diplomacy was only breaking one of your limbs instead of all of them. He had 2 Vrolthan accomplices, Dargoth and Skrell, who shared approximately 3 brain cells between them, but compensated with enthusiasm for violence. Rounding out the group were 2 Kelmorian, Quarst, and Thren, who brought the magic of 4 arms each to the ancient art of beating someone senseless. What had started as routine training drills had evolved, as these things do, into a spontaneous demonstration of physics. Specifically, the physics of what happens when you punch someone significantly smaller than you across a 200-meter arena. Vec tumbled across the shock plating for the 4th time, his training uniform torn, one wing bent at an angle that definitely was not in the original design specifications. He tried to stand, failed, managed it on the 2nd attempt through sheer stubborn refusal to give them the satisfaction of staying down. Blood, slightly more purple than human blood, dripped from his beak. "Oh, look, the little bird still wants to fly," Kragoth announced to the arena at large. His voice carried that special quality of someone who had never been punched hard enough to reconsider their life choices. "Maybe we should help him. Dargoth, you take left, I will take right. Let us see if Tyrellian actually can fly." The dozen other cadets scattered around the arena found sudden fascination with their equipment checks. A few watched with the kind of uncomfortable expression that suggested they knew this was wrong, but had bills to pay, and a strong preference for having their own bones remain inside their bodies where they belonged. "This is training," Quarst added helpfully, all 4 of his crystalline arms flexing in sequence like a very threatening wave. "We are teaching proper combat awareness. How will small bird learn to fight if we do not provide vigorous opposition?" The logic was airtight if you were an absolute psychopath. Vec raised his arms in a defensive posture that would not have stopped a firm handshake, let alone what was coming. To his credit, he did not beg. The Tyrellian had their own honor code, and it included facing your death with dignity, even if your death was being administered by 5 assholes who should have been expelled months ago. Kragoth reared back for another strike, his fist the size of Vec's entire head, his claws extended just enough to make this really educational. The blow would have landed with the force of a small vehicle traveling at ill-advised speeds. It did not land. The arena doors, which had been sealed for the private training session, suddenly opened with a hydraulic hiss. Someone walked in, and the temperature of the room immediately dropped several degrees, though not from any climate control malfunction. Lieutenant Reyna Kovac was not an impressive physical specimen by sector military standards. She stood 5 feet and 7 inches in her combat boots, which translated to roughly half of Kragoth's height and maybe a quarter of his mass if you were being generous. Her frame was compact, her muscles present but not particularly pronounced. Her features carrying the kind of ethnic ambiguity that came from Earth's particularly enthusiastic approach to genetic mixing. Her hair was pulled back in a regulation braid, her uniform crisp, and her expression suggesting she had walked into a training arena to find exactly what she expected to find, and was somehow still disappointed. She was technically an observer, part of Earth's integration program, where human officers were assigned to assess sector military protocols and report back on whether humanity could actually function in a proper military structure. Most species viewed these observers as a courtesy, like letting a child sit in the cockpit. Except the child was an entire species, and the cockpit was a massive interstellar military apparatus. Reyna had been observing Carvac's protocols for 6 weeks now. She had observed the training schedules, the combat rotations, the equipment maintenance cycles, and, most relevantly, the pattern of training accidents that befell weaker species with suspicious regularity. Her reports were detailed, professional, and had been comprehensively ignored by the station command, who had more important things to worry about than one human's opinion on their perfectly functional system. She stopped walking about 20 meters from the group, her stance casual, her hands not quite resting on her hips, but not quite hanging loose either. She took in the scene with the kind of thorough assessment that made instructors nervous, because it suggested actual thinking was happening behind those eyes. Training exercise? Her voice carried across the arena, not loud, but projecting with the clarity of someone used to being heard. Her sector standard was accented but fluent. Interesting technique. 5-on-1, target already injured, no instructor supervision, doors sealed. Tell me, which manual covers this particular drill? I seem to have missed that chapter. Cregoth paused mid-wind-up, his fist still cocked back, his tiny brain processing this interruption. He looked at Reyna the way you might look at a particularly bold insect that had wandered onto your dinner plate. The expression that formed on his reptilian features could be generously described as amusement and more accurately described as the look a predator gets right before it decides to add you to the menu. Human, he said, drawing out the word like it was something he found stuck to his boot. This is not your concern. Your species observes. That is the agreement. You observe, we train. You return to your little planet and tell them how real warriors operate. Go observe somewhere else. The other 4 spread out slightly, not quite surrounding Reyna, but definitely occupying a formation that suggested they had done this before. Dargoth cracked his knuckles, which sounded like rocks grinding together. Skrell's tail swished with anticipation. Quarst and Thren shifted their 4 arms each into ready positions, creating a veritable forest of crystalline limbs. Reyna did not move. She looked at Cregoth, then at his accomplices, then at Vec, who was bleeding on the floor behind them, then back at Cregoth. A small smile touched her lips, the kind of smile that did not reach her eyes and suggested someone had just made a critical miscalculation. Here is what is going to happen, she said, her voice remaining conversational, almost friendly. You're going to step away from the cadet. You're going to report to medical to have your training injuries documented. Then you are going to report to your supervising officer and explain how 5 elite warriors sustained injuries during an unsupervised training accident. This is your one opportunity to make intelligent decisions. I suggest you take it. The arena had gone completely silent. The other cadets had stopped even pretending to train. This was no longer background entertainment. This was about to become a story people told. Cregoth looked at his team. His team looked at Reyna. Then Cregoth laughed, a sound like boulders rolling downhill. Or what, little human? You will file a report? Write a strongly worded observation? Your species is soft, weak. You come from a garden world where nothing wants to kill you. You have no idea what real combat is. I don't know, Reyna said thoughtfully. Earth does have this thing called persistence hunting. We would chase prey for hours, sometimes days, until it collapsed from exhaustion. Not very dramatic, I admit. We also have millions of years of evolution as tribal warfare specialists, but that is probably not relevant. I am sure you are right. I am sure my opinion on combat means nothing. She started walking forward. Not rushing, not aggressive. Just walking with the calm purposefulness of someone heading to a meeting they had scheduled. What I do know, she continued, closing the distance at a steady pace, is Sector Military Protocol Article 7, Section 12, Paragraph 4, which states that assault of cadets outside of supervised combat exercises carries mandatory discharge and possible criminal charges. I also know that there are 47 functioning observation cameras in this arena, including the one directly above us that has recorded this entire incident. And I know that the real reason the instructors are not here is because they were told to give you privacy for exactly this kind of behavior, which makes them accomplices to assault. She was 10 meters away now. Kragoth's smile had frozen slightly. But mostly, Reyna said, and her voice had changed, dropping the conversational tone for something colder, harder. I know that if you do not step away from that cadet right now, I am going to make you step away. And unlike your victim, I fight back. The moment hung there, pregnant with possibility. In a saner universe, 5 trained warriors would have reconsidered attacking a military observer, especially one who had just outlined exactly how much trouble they were already in. In a saner universe, someone would have called for an instructor, filed a proper report, and handled this through proper channels. The universe was not particularly sane. Quarst moved first. His crystalline body refracted light in dizzying patterns, as all 4 arms reached for Reyna simultaneously. His species had evolved for close combat, their multiple limbs allowing for grappling combinations that 2-armed species struggled to counter. He was fast, trained, and confident. Reyna was faster. She dropped under the grasping arms, her compact frame becoming an advantage as she slipped through a gap that would not have existed for a larger fighter. Her hand found Quarst's lower right elbow joint, where the crystalline structure met organic tissue, and she applied pressure with her thumb in a way that joint was definitely not designed to handle. The Kelmorian's confident expression transformed into shocked agony as his entire right side seized, his crystalline body's integrated nervous system working against him. Reyna pivoted, using Quarst's own momentum and mass to swing him around like a very painful shield just as Kragoth's fist arrived. The blow that had been meant for Reyna instead caught his Kelmorian ally in the torso with a crack like breaking glass. Quarst collapsed, clutching his arm and ribs, out of the fight before he fully understood the fight had started. Article 7. Reyna said conversationally, releasing Quarst and flowing back into a ready stance that looked wrong, too casual, weight distributed in ways that violated every sector combat manual. Also, fun fact about human joints. We have significantly more flexibility than most species. Evolutionary advantage from being arboreal in our distant past. Terrible for pure strength, excellent for grappling. Kragoth stared at his fallen accomplice, his rust-colored eyes wide with something that might have been the first stirrings of actual thought. Then rage took over, because thinking was hard and hitting things was easy. He swung mid-swing at Reyna, his massive fist cutting through air with a whistle, enough force behind it to crack combat plating. Reyna was not there. She had shifted her weight backward, the blow missing by centimeters, close enough that wind from its passage moved her hair. Before Kragoth could recover, she stepped inside his guard, past the effective range of his arms, and drove her elbow into his solar plexus with surgical precision. Vrolthan physiology included redundant organs and reinforced bone structure. What it did not include was special protection for the nerve cluster just below the sternum. Kragoth's breath exploded out of him, his scales no defense against the spike of agony that radiated through his core. Dargoth charged while his leader gasped for air, displaying the kind of tactical thinking that explained why he was Kragoth's second rather than leading his own pack of bullies. He was bigger than Kragoth, slower but stronger, and he came at Reyna like a runaway freight train made of muscles and poor decisions. Reyna did not try to stop him. She dodged left, grabbed a weighted training harness from the nearest equipment rack, and as Dargoth thundered past, she swung it with both hands into the side of his knee. Vrolthan bones were dense, incredibly strong, capable of withstanding tremendous impact. Their joints, however, followed the same basic biomechanical principles as every other terrestrial species. Hit a knee from the side with enough force, and physics did not care how tough you were. Dargoth went down hard, his leg buckling, his own momentum contributing to the catastrophic failure of his knee joint. He hit the shock plating with an impact that shook the arena floor, a sound halfway between a roar and a scream, tearing from his throat. 3 down in under 10 seconds. The other cadets were not pretending to train anymore. They were just staring, jaws hanging open where applicable, because what they were witnessing violated several fundamental assumptions about how the universe worked. Thren, the second Kelmorian, had more sense than his compatriots. He did not charge. Instead, he circled, his 4 arms adopting a defensive pattern, his crystalline body shifting colors as he cycled through tactical assessments. He was trained in proper Kelmorian combat doctrine, which emphasized using superior limb count to create overwhelming offense while maintaining defensive coverage. "You got lucky," he said, his voice carrying the resonance of crystal. Quarst was careless. "You cannot surprise me. I have 4 arms. You have 2. Simple mathematics." "Counterpoint," Reyna said. And she was smiling now, actually smiling like someone had told a joke she particularly enjoyed. "You have 4 arms, which means 4 sets of joints, 4 sets of nerve clusters, and 4 times as many potential failure points. Also, you are thinking like a Kelmorian. You are assuming a direct engagement where your limb advantage matters. I am thinking like a human. I am assuming that I am smaller, weaker, and outnumbered, which means I fight dirty." She moved then, but not toward Thren. She moved toward one of the training posts, a 3-meter Durasteel pole used for practicing strikes. She kicked its base release, and the pole came free in her hands, suddenly giving her a meter of reach advantage and a solid metal equalizer. Thren's tactical assessment updated rapidly. 4 arms were excellent in close combat. 4 arms were significantly less excellent against someone with reach and leverage, who was not polite enough to get within grappling distance. He adjusted his approach, moving more cautiously, trying to find an angle. He never found it. Reyna used the post like it was an extension of her body, striking low and fast, targeting joints and nerve points with a precision that suggested she knew exactly where every species stored their biological weak points. When Thren tried to grab the post, she let him, then used his own pull to close distance and drive her knee into his midsection with enough force to crack his crystalline surface. As Thren staggered, Reyna released the post, stepped behind him, and applied a chokehold that probably was not in any sector combat manual, because it required understanding human leverage principles that simply did not occur to species who relied on raw strength. Thren struggled, his 4 arms scrabbling uselessly, his superior strength meaningless when he could not get proper positioning. 20 seconds later, he went limp, unconscious but alive. Reyna lowered him carefully to the floor, checked his breathing, then straightened and looked at Kragoth and Skrell, the only 2 still standing. Kragoth had recovered his breath, but not his confidence. Skrell looked like he was reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. "You see the problem?" Reyna said, not even breathing hard despite having just disabled 3 trained warriors. "Is that you have been trained to fight other species who follow sector combat doctrine. Honorable engagement, test of strength, demonstration of dominance. Very traditional, very predictable." She started walking toward them again, that same steady pace. Except now there was blood on her uniform. where Quarst had managed a glancing blow she had not even acknowledged. And her knuckles were split where they had made contact with Vrothan's scales. Humans do not have combat doctrine in that sense. We have thousands of years of killing each other in every way imaginable because we are awful like that. Wrestling from ancient Greece, boxing from England, savate from France, Krav Maga from Israel, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, Sambo. And those are just the named ones, not counting every dirty trick, every improvised technique, every vicious innovation created by someone who absolutely had to win or die. Kragoth and Skrell exchanged glances. They were bullies, not warriors, despite what their training records claimed. Bullies operated on a simple principle: pick on the weak, back down to the strong. Never fight anyone who might actually hurt you. The calculation flickering behind their eyes was obvious. Was pride worth the hospital stay? Kragoth decided it was, because he was fundamentally stupid. He roared, a sound that rattled equipment on the walls, and charged with Skrell flanking him. The two Vrothan finally showing some actual tactical coordination. If they could pin her between them, use their mass advantage, maybe they could salvage this. Reyna did not look worried. She looked focused, calculating angles and timing with the cold precision of someone who had run these scenarios in her head 1,000 times. As they closed, she did something completely unexpected. She charged to meet them. Every sector combat manual stressed maintaining distance from superior mass opponents. Never let them close, never engage in a direct strength contest, use mobility and range. Reyna threw out every manual and went straight at Kragoth, dropping low at the last second and sliding between his legs like a baseball player stealing home. His grab missed by inches. She came up behind him, used his own tail as a step, and launched herself at Skrell, who had been circling around. What happened next was less like a fight and more like a violent physics lesson. Reyna hit Skrell high, wrapped her legs around his neck in a triangle choke, and used gravity and leverage to bring him down. As he fell, she twisted, adding torque. And they hit the ground with her on top, her legs locked around his throat, her body positioned so his strength worked against him. The harder he pushed, the tighter the choke became. 30 seconds of desperate struggling later, he joined Thren in unconsciousness. Reyna rolled off him, came to her feet, and turned to face Kragoth. Just the two of them now. The arena had gone beyond silent into something approaching religious awe. This was not supposed to be possible. Humans were weak. Humans were soft. Humans were observers. Last chance, Reyna said. She was breathing heavier now, her endurance impressive but not unlimited. Sweat plastered hair to her forehead. Her uniform was torn in places. But she was standing, and 4 trained warriors were not. Walk away. Get medical attention. Accept the consequences. Or find out why humans are not extinct despite being physically inferior to half the galaxy. Kragoth looked at his fallen team. He looked at the human who barely came up to his chest. He looked at his own hands, massive and clawed and designed by evolution to kill. He was stronger. He was bigger. He was trained by Sector's finest combat instructors. He had every physical advantage except one. He had never needed to win a fight. Reyna had evolved from species that did. He charged anyway, because pride is a terminal diagnosis. Reyna sidestepped, but not quite far enough. Kragoth clipped her shoulder, sending her spinning. She controlled the spin, used the momentum to add force to a hammer strike that caught him in the kidney, or where his kidney would be if Vrothan anatomy matched human, but close enough that it hurt. Kragoth swung a backhand that whistled past her face. She ducked under, drove a fist into his inner thigh, targeting the femoral nerve cluster. and when he instinctively shifted weight, she kicked his other knee. It was not pretty. It was not elegant. It was brutal, efficient, and utterly relentless. Every time Kragoth swung, she was not there. Every time he tried to use his strength, she used his momentum. Every time he thought he had her cornered, she was already moving to the next position. She hit joints. She hit nerves. She hit the accumulated weak points of Vrolthan biology with the precision of someone who had studied species anatomy like it was a doctoral dissertation on how to hurt people. And she did not stop. That was the thing. Kragoth started slowing, his breath coming harder, his swings losing speed. Reyna kept moving, kept striking, her endurance simply outlasting his. Vrolthan were built for explosive power. Humans were built to chase prey until it died of exhaustion. Different evolutionary pressures created different warriors. The end came almost anticlimactic. Kragoth swung one more time, putting everything behind it, and Reyna did not dodge. She stepped into the blow, caught his arm, and used a joint lock that looked simple but required understanding every bone and muscle in the Vrolthan arm. Something in his elbow popped audibly. Kragoth screamed. Reyna swept his legs, rode him down, and applied a pin that left him face down on the shock plating, his damaged arm twisted behind him in a position that promised agony if he moved. "Submit," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying beyond the two of them. "Human," Kragoth started. She applied more pressure. He screamed again. "Submit." Pride warred with pain. Pain won. "I submit." She released. Him immediately stood and stepped back. Kragoth curled on the ground, cradling his arm, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Around them lay 4 other cadets, unconscious or writhing in pain, and one human observer who looked like she had gone through a minor vehicle collision, but was still standing. The arena doors opened. Instructors poured in, their timing suspiciously convenient. Their expressions carefully arranged into shock and concern that absolutely would have been more useful 10 minutes ago. The senior instructor, a grizzled Dravothian who had been conveniently in his office during the incident, took in the scene with eyes that had seen 1,000 similar situations and carefully pretended not to understand any of them. What happened here? His voice carried false authority, the kind that worked on cadets who still believed in the system. Reyna looked at him, her expression pleasant, her voice perfectly level. "Training accident, sir. 5 cadets were conducting an unsupervised exercise when they accidentally injured themselves. I attempted to provide instruction on proper safety protocols, but they insisted on continuing. The resulting injuries are documented by arena surveillance, along with the preceding assault on Cadet Vake, the conspicuous absence of supervising officers, and several violations of sector military protocol that I will detail in my report." The instructor's face went carefully blank. Behind Reyna, cadets were helping Vek to his feet, others tending to the fallen bullies, and everyone was studiously avoiding eye contact with anyone else. "Your report," the instructor said slowly, "will be reviewed by Station Command. It will be reviewed by Earth's Integration Oversight Committee, the Sector Military Ethics Board, and my commanding officer, Admiral Chen, who I believe is scheduled to visit this station next week. I am certain she will be very interested in Karvak's training protocols, particularly as they apply to species integration and cadet welfare." Reyna pulled out a data pad, began documenting the scene with methodical precision. "I will also be recommending psychological evaluation for all 5 cadets involved, formal reprimands for supervising staff who failed to prevent this incident, and a comprehensive review of how many other training accidents have occurred in this facility over the past standard year." The instructor looked like he wanted to argue. He looked at the unconscious cadets. He looked at Cadet, who was being helped to his feet by medics. He looked at Reyna, who was documenting everything with the relentless efficiency of someone who understood that paperwork was often more devastating than violence. He said nothing. Over the next week, stories spread through Station Erebus 9 with the speed of gossip and the embellishment that comes from repeated telling. The human observer had killed 5 elite warriors with her bare hands. No, she had used ancient earth weapons. No, she had revealed that humans were actually a warrior species in disguise. No, she was some kind of super soldier experiment. The details got fuzzy, but the core remained consistent. Do not mess with the human observer. Reyna filed her report, detailed and documented, with attached surveillance footage that made very uncomfortable viewing for Station Command. Admiral Chen did visit, did review the findings, and did have several closed-door meetings that resulted in sudden instructor reassignments and updated training protocols. Cadet and his accomplices were quietly transferred to different postings, far from each other, where they could contemplate their life choices without an audience. Vec recovered from his injuries and tried to thank Reyna, who deflected with the same discomfort soldiers across species show when praised for doing what they consider basic decency. He asked her why she had intervened when it was not her concern, when it risked her position, when the smart move was to observe and report. Because it was wrong, Reyna said simply. Because someone needed to step in. Because I was there and I could help. Anything else is just finding excuses for cowardice. Simple words. Simple philosophy. The kind of thing that seemed obvious until you had to actually live it. What the incident revealed to those paying attention was not that humans were secretly strong or that Earth had been hiding some biological advantage. What it revealed was something far more concerning for the species who had grown comfortable in their hierarchy. Humans did not win through superior strength or speed or natural weapons. They won through adaptability, through refusing to quit, through the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 generations that had survived by being clever, vicious, and absolutely relentless when necessary. They won because they had evolved on a planet that did not care about fair fights, where survival meant using every tool, every trick, every advantage, no matter how small. Where combat was not about honor or glory, but about making it to tomorrow. The sector military had 47 member species, each with proud warrior traditions, tested doctrines, and established hierarchies based on physical capability. They had created systems that reinforced these hierarchies, that allowed the strong to dominate, because strength was what mattered in their experience. Then humans showed up from their garden world with their soft bodies and flexible joints, and completely unreasonable refusal to acknowledge that they were outmatched. And the funny thing was, nobody had bothered to ask what kind of species survives and thrives on a garden world. What kind of evolutionary pressures create a species that is weaker than most predators, slower than most prey, lacking natural weapons or armor, but still becomes the dominant species on their planet? The answer was simple and unsettling. The kind that fights smarter, not harder. The kind that turns every disadvantage into a tool. The kind that simply does not stop. In the months that followed, more human observers were assigned to sector facilities. Training protocols were updated. The casual brutality that had been tolerated as tradition started receiving actual oversight. It was not a revolution, just a slow adjustment. The galactic equivalent of realizing that maybe the new species had valid perspectives on military conduct. And in training arenas across sector space, cadets who had been comfortable in their dominance started looking over their shoulders. Because somewhere out there was a human observer with a data pad and zero patience for their nonsense. And unlike the bullies they were used to, humans documented everything, followed up on every report, and had this absolutely infuriating tendency to care about justice, even when it was inconvenient. The Carvax training complex still operated. Cadets still trained. Warriors were still forged. But now, when someone started getting ideas about educational beatings and character-building violence, someone else would remember the story of the human observer. And they would remember that strength without discipline was just brutality. And brutality, it turned out, looked a lot less impressive when someone was filing criminal charges against you. Lieutenant Raina Kovac continued her assignment, documenting protocols, submitting reports, and maintaining the cheerfully professional demeanor of someone who knew exactly how much damage she could do to your career with proper paperwork. She gave the other cadets a wide berth, but it was a respectful distance now. Not the dismissive space afforded to primitives. Earth, for its part, continued its integration into the unified sectors, continued providing observers, soldiers, engineers, and all the other roles needed in a galactic military, and continued surprising species who had made assumptions based on first impressions rather than careful analysis. Because the thing about garden worlds is they look peaceful from orbit. But up close, where survival happens, they are just as brutal as any death world. They just teach different lessons. And the species that survives a garden world by becoming the apex predator without claws, without fangs, without armor, learns lessons that turn out to be surprisingly applicable across the galaxy. The Carvax instructors eventually updated their training manual's opening disclaimer. After the sections on safety protocols and equipment guidelines, they added one new line in small text that most cadets skipped over, but some remembered. Combat capability is not determined solely by physical attributes. Adapt or lose. It was not poetic, but it was honest. And honestly was something Station Erebus 9 had been lacking for quite some time. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.